We'll be creating a birch bark wrap for a tall votive candle. You can buy these for $1 at the dollar store. Dollar Tree has them. And the first thing we want to do, we're working with cardstock, a white cardstock. It's not too heavy, it's bendable and pliable, but it's 8.5 by 11 inches. So we want to measure it against the size of the votive. And I do see that it is a little taller. It's 8 inches, so we need to trim off some of our paper. So we want to mark it off at a 1/2 inch all the way across. I'm just going to trim. If you have a paper cutter, it makes it even easier, but if not, just trim the excess with scissors. Measure it against, make sure it's just at the edge of the rim. You want to make sure you're not seeing the glass. It's also a little longer than we need on this. We don't want to have to wrap it too far around, so I would remove 2 inches from the length. Mark that off as well. And this part we're going to actually save to use as scrap as we work. And I'll show you how we're going to work with that. So now we should have the right size. We know it's the right height and the length to wrap around. We want at least an overlap that we know will adhere nicely. To get our birch bark look, one of the first steps is we're going to just add a tone, a gray tone, not with paint, but actually with pencil. And what you want to do is use your pencil, create an area, and fill it in with your graphite to give you something to work with. We're going to smudge it on our finger and then blend it. And if just a few areas of our paper. Just a light gray, kind of a haze that we're creating. You might need to go back and add a little bit more graphite as you work. It might be helpful to look up birch bark online just to see some different textures and patterns that are created that you can follow. If not, you can just make up your own. If you have a birch tree in your yard, you can go out and look at that. But there's a lot of resources to check, and different types of birch trees look different. So you can add any of those touches if you'd like to make it look more natural. Once you have a few gray tones on your paper, everything's going in a horizontal direction. We want to keep going with the natural tendency of the birch bark to have that look. And that will go with the painting as well. So with our scrap, we're also going to use that to work with the painting process. You're going to work with a stiff brush that has pretty flexible but stiff brushes, and you don't want it to be wet in any way. You want to start off by dipping the edges of your brush in the paint. Maybe start off by, you don't want it to be too heavy. Use your scrap paper to get that brushed effect. That's what we're looking for. And we're just going to do very random brush lines. Some can be heavier than others. And work your way down your paper. If you want to have a few areas that are a little darker, don't wipe off as much. Definitely don't go on too heavy though, because then it will just be too dark and we can't undo that. Some areas on the birch trees have almost what looks like knots, and maybe it's a little heavier and darker. Make them a little irregular shaped. But always keep the horizontal direction of your brush stroke. Always test it first on your scrap paper, then you'll be less likely to go on too dark or too heavy. Keep a bigger piece of scrap paper so you can actually take your brush strokes right off the paper itself. Either direction, if you want to come toward it, you'll get a nice little brush stroke coming into your picture. There will be some overlap, and some of your design will get covered up, but fill it all the way in nonetheless. You want to make sure you have enough coverage, and take it all the way down the bottom as well. The bottom and the top have a little bit coming off the top. If you look at samples of birch bark, there's usually a very thin line of texture throughout the bark. You can achieve that using a fine line marker. This Sharpie has a fine tip, it's considered, but the fine line is actually on the other end, or you can just buy a single marker that has that fine line tip. And you don't need a ruler, but you should just freehand just tiny dash lines in a series all around, but always horizontal. You really don't need to use a ruler for this. The lines, even if they're not perfectly straight, just will look more natural. On the trees themselves, they're not perfectly straight. Be aware of any paint that might still be wet, so you don't want to accidentally smudge it. Although a little smudging still probably would work with your design. You could always turn it into another knot. And just be careful for any paint that might be heavy and wet still. Before you're handling it, use a blow dryer to dry it, or if you think it's dry, also test it out on your scrap paper. And we're going to apply just a glue stick, just to adhere it to our glass votive. And the goal will be covering the entire paper, and especially the joint areas, the seam where they'll be joined together. And just really get full coverage. And just line it up. Maybe see which edge you'd like to have shown more if you have your design a certain way that you'd like it to show. Keep it flat on the table so your edge is right. I think my design works either way, I think, so I'm just going to keep it. Make sure it doesn't slip up. You want to make sure it lines up with itself straight. And if you keep it on the table and line it up at the bottom, it should go around in a straight format. And really press down on your seam to make sure it's sticking together. Be wary if you are going to light this that I would have the candle, I would probably burn the candle down a little lower in order to light it so it's not up at the edge where the paper is. If you don't want to use it that way, you could also put a little battery-operated votive candle, and fits right in the top, and have it battery-operated, which is probably the safest way to go. A finishing touch you can do is adding a little ribbon. I like the red that goes with the black and white. It certainly works nicely for the holidays if you wanted this at Christmas time. It's also just a nice accent at the winter time. And just a little ribbon touch. What's nice, it also secures the seam that we have at the back. That keeps it nice and staying together as well. And that is you could do different heights too. That would be a combination, a lower votive, and can group them together as a set. And that's a nice little accent for the winter.